So again, just to give you another, just to reiterate here on what the MUT table represents. The MUT table represents all the possible values that you can log using a data logger program. It does that by pointing to memory locations in the ECU while it's running, and those memory locations will change depending on what it is that you need to log. From the factory, certain things just work out of the box. Certain things like RPM, throttle position, timing, those are straightforward and they're already set up in the MUT table, so there's no changes you need to make in order to log them. But in order to log things like 2 by load, 2 by airflow, and so on, we need to edit these addresses in the MUT table in order to enable logging of those features. So that's an important thing to learn before you start tuning at all, is learning how to edit the MUT table, learning what your specific addresses are for the MUT table itself, and then for things like 2 by load and 2 by airflow. Those are important to set up because you don't want to have an estimated or calculated load or an airflow that's clipped at a certain value that you can't read beyond. So to get the most accurate information possible while you're data logging your car, you want to make sure that the MUT table is accurate. So one last thing that we'll cover in this video is just taking a look at some of the other maps besides a fuel map and a timing map, just so you can understand what it is that you're looking at and what it is that you'll probably be tuning down the road. So as I said, the high octane fuel map, high octane ignition maps are predominantly what gets tuned or what gets adjusted. Now, to understand what the low octane map represents, all you have to realize is that the NOx sensor, as we discussed earlier, will utilize this other map, this other low octane fuel map, if there's a significant amount of NOx that the NOx sensor detects. So if we look at these two side by side, or top to bottom, you can see the high octane fuel map on the top here and our low octane fuel map on the bottom. So all this means is that when we experience a significant amount of NOx, we'll be flipping from one map to another, or we'll be interpolating between the two. So basically it'll take values from here and values from here, and depending on the amount of NOx that you're experiencing, it will determine how much fuel to mix. So if you're trying to tune fuel, if you're trying to tune timing, and things that you're logging just don't seem to match up with what you see in the maps here, and you're experiencing a significant amount of NOx, it's possible that you're interpolating between the high octane and the low octane maps. So ideally, you don't want to have any NOx, so you won't be interpolating between these two. And the other best practice, not to go into too much detail, but is to set these low octane maps, which there are also some for the ignition, significantly more conservative than the high octane counterparts, because what you don't want is a low octane map that gets resourced while you're under heavy NOx to be just as or even more aggressive than your high octane map. You basically want it to fall back on something that will keep the engine safe, keep the car safe. So some of the other things that we expose here, things like injector pulse width adder. So if you're cold cranking the car, how much fuel it's going to put in there. Just to give you a quick example of where something like this might be used, if you put a significantly larger size injector in your car, you're going to notice that it just does not want to start. And that's because these cranking IPW adder values are assuming that you have a stock size injector. So if you have, even if the engine's nice and warm, it's going to be adding a 3 millisecond injector pulse width, which may just be too much, and you might be flooding the engine trying to start it up. So you'll have to pump the gas pedal, get the throttle body open, get some more air in there, and get it to fire off. I noticed this when going up to 1050cc injectors. So what you do in that case is basically you come into this injector pulse width table, You could even bulk select the entire region and go into Edit, multiply data, and in my case, where I've basically doubled the size of my stock injectors, I can multiply these guys by 0.5, 1/2, and that'll give us a more reasonable injector pulse width adder for while we're cranking the engine. So basically, making a simple change like that turned my car that just did not want to start into a car that starts just like stock. So that's an example of what you'd use for the cranking IPWR table. Now, again, not all ROM versions have this ROM, and you'll note that as cars got progressively older, as we got to the 04, 05, 06 Evos, Mitsubishi seemed to add some features that the older ones just didn't have. So it does kind of stink if you're on an 03 Evo and you just don't have some of these tables. I've tuned some 03 Evos that this table doesn't exist, or the airflow offset table doesn't exist. If you can't find it, that could be why. If you're on an 03, 04, if you're on an older Evo, or if you don't have an Evo 6, or I'm sorry, if you don't have an Evo 9, obviously you won't have a MIVEC cam intake map. Some of the other things you'll notice, immobilizer. This is a pretty important but very basic 1D table. It's just whatever value that your immobilizer in your car is programmed to. So if you need to take your ROM and give it to someone else to tune, or if you need to edit someone else's ROM, you want to be aware that the immobilizer is associated with their car, and that if this value changes, the car won't start. Now, there are ways to disable the immobilizer, which we may get into in a different video, but be aware that this value is key to getting the car to start. And if that changes, or if you use a ROM from someone else and you try to send it, flash it into your car and start it, and the car just doesn't start, it's probably because the immobilizer isn't set up correctly. Lean spool, just to get into the real basics of it, is the additional leaning of the air-fuel mix by the ECU when it believes you're spooling up the turbo. So there's a lot of different tables here. I mean, you'll find that a lot of the different tables that have been defined in EcuFlash, they may seem overwhelming to look at, but in all honesty, you won't be using a lot of these. And in many cases, people actually just disable lean spool altogether, and the reason is because it can make tuning air-fuel ratio very annoying, because what's happening is it's taking the values that we've defined in our fuel maps, and it's applying additional leaning or additional reducing of fuel to try to assist with the spooling of the turbo. So we've found, or most people have found, that disabling lean spool completely kind of makes a more consistent tuning approach when tuning air-fuel ratios. Now, if you remember, here's probably a good time to look at it. If we adjust the scaling values in one of these timing maps, let's say we set this guy to 8,000, and then we take a look at one of our low-octane timing maps, you notice that the 8,000 carried over to there as well. So that's just kind of to point out the fact that these guys are looking at the same address, and if we looked at their table definitions in the XML, we'd see that they actually, these scalings live at the same address. You'll also note that if we compare a high octane and a low octane timing map, that the low octane is running significantly less timing than the high octane. And that's intentional because, as I said, if the car is experiencing significant knock, what we don't want is to increase ignition timing, because too much timing is possibly what caused the knock to begin with, or it could be poor fuel, etc., or overboosting. I won't get into too much detail about what the other tables are in here, but you can control quite a bit. I mean, obviously that's pretty apparent. When you open up EcuFlash, you get a whole heck of a lot of tables, most of which probably won't make much sense to you until you have to go to use them for the first time. But you can control the stock boost control solenoid. You can control how much air that boost control solenoid is going to bleed away from the wastegate. You can control all the idle stepper control valve, target idle. You control the rev limits. You can control other ECU periphery options. ECU periphery is basically, a feature of the ECU. Um, uh, Particularly, maybe it controls a solenoid, maybe it controls the logic to perform a specific check that would throw uh, a check engine light. There's one to control the immobilizers, one to control the EGRs. There's an ECU periphery for a lot of the functions of the ECU that can be disabled in these ECU periphery tables. So if you're looking to disable something, if you're looking to turn off a particular check engine light because you know it's not anything real or anything that's really a problem, it's going to be done through the ECU periphery tables, the blob-bits tables we've defined. You here see just I've populated some of these guys with the codes that are associated with that. So if I happen to be getting, let's say I'm getting this evap incorrect purge flow P0441 check engine light code. If there is something wrong with that particular code getting thrown all the time, and I know it's not actually an issue, I just come in here and remember we have to use the decrement increment options. I can turn off that ECU periphery, and that code will never get thrown anymore. So it's kind of nice. If you happen to, if you have removed the stock boost control solenoid and you use a manual boost controller, and the stock solenoid isn't even in the car anymore, it's completely gone, disconnected, you'll want to come in here and turn off the ECU periphery. You don't get a check engine light. So that's some more intermediate explanation of EcuFlash. We've gone over a lot of the XML files, raw editing of the XML. We've gone over some of the tuning concepts and some of the table uses that we have set up here. And in future videos we'll get into more specific tuning styles and how to actually go about